Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke McMichael and Martin Resney. Today, we have our second guest from the Golden Door Awards, David James, commendation for the nonfiction book category with his book, Your Mind at Siege. Thanks so much for joining us today, David. We've got a large variety of backgrounds with things like gurus, yogi retreats, and lots of different unmonk things.
Sure.
So we're really excited to kind of pick your brain on all these different topics. Also, been big in the banking industry, and with the Chloro Earth was a company you founded almost 10 years ago now that did a lot of things with making wood products out of agribusiness and waste products from the agri industry in India. So we're kind of curious on that whole journey you've taken as far as building a plan to save the world from your own little perspective in India. So thanks so much for joining us. Would you like to take a couple minutes and just introduce yourself to our audience, and we'll start digging in with some fun questions.
Sure. Glad to be here. It's a very interesting podcast. I went through your website as well, so I'm happy to contribute to, save the world in any way that one can. So, my background is actually quite mixed. I used to be a banker in Singapore and Hong Kong and London, etc. But I had a personal tragedy with my eyesight. I lost my eyesight for a few years. That brought me back to India, and the corporate career was like a dead end. So I became an entrepreneur, and I was wondering what was happening with climate change and facing the shocking news that, you have 25 to 35,000 farmers committing suicide because of generational debt. And no one seemed to be addressing that. So I'd gone right through the country to understand what the problem was. And in that venture, I introduced something called industrial ecology, because I saw agriculture looking at the problem in a very, very different way. In fact, they were not looking at the problem at all. They're looking at what is called yield per acre. We're just trying to raise the yield per acre. And I think that's the great mistake right throughout the world, because you sort of saturate your land with just one cash crop, and it depletes the resources of the land. So if you look at diversity, or crop diversity, one of the things I introduce is understanding a non-agricultural product which could give farmers a second income. And one of the things we identified through agricultural resources, or residue, if you will, that you could actually identify resources from agriculture where people were burning up or throwing away, which could get into green buildings and stuff like that, which would be enormous exponential income for farmers. And we prototyped it, we demonstrated it, etc. And I rewrote agricultural models, etc. And of course, venture capitalists don't like to fund long-term capital. They see things in 90 days. And so capital was very scarce. So I changed my model. I gave it over to a friend, and I just basically consult on material science and understanding what environmental buildings are and how you can actually help agriculturists in poor countries to do that. But like I mentioned, that I did spend a long time in ashrams and monasteries right throughout my childhood. And that was still in the back of the mind. And I was getting called back repeatedly to address certain issues of religion, spirituality, and consciousness. And it was not something that I got up one day from the bed and decided to write about. It was just part of my nature. And for some reason, I thought that the flip side or the upside of the pandemic is it sort of brought like-minded people onto a common platform. And that was Clubhouse, Club Deck, and Discord, and many other platforms. And there were questions being tossed around, and I was in the background, and I realized that many of the questions were really based on ego and, frankly, illiterate. And so are the many answers that were coming out. And I do have a formal education in ancient religion and language, not because I chose it. It's because I spent so many years in ashrams as well. So my knowledge of Sanskrit is actually much better than just a working knowledge. And so when I intervened and basically said, there's a problem here, you can't shoot your mouth off. And then we began to talk about what consciousness, spirituality, and religion is. And it became a motley audience of what I would call neo-Vedantists, so people who really are for the political agenda of Vedanta or even Buddhism. And the third audience was a lot of scientific-minded people as well. So there was a lot of what is called crosstalk and arguments, etc. And then we began to actually coalesce around understanding what the mind was, and that developed into a podcast around the Diamond Sutra, because people were quoting the Diamond Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, and very familiar with those two ancient texts. And we began to talk about it. So it's not a very large book, actually, the Diamond Sutra. It's about 30 chapters, but after the 13th chapter, it's just repetition. But you can actually go and discuss every chapter. So whilst the podcast became quite viral, I was getting calls back to explain what I meant by saying this or saying that. And finally, the pandemic ended, and I was afflicted by COVID. And I was a few months in ICU. I did not expect to live it either. And I got out after 6 weeks in the ICU. And then I felt that I was not going to make it. So somebody said, I think you'll need to put it in written form to put some context. So that podcast became 13 chapters of this book, Your Mind at Siege. And I provided context and substantiated it with footnotes, etc., of what consciousness is not, rather than what consciousness is. And you're holding that book in your hand. This one, I believe. Yes, I can.
Excellent. Your Mind at Siege.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Wow. So some very deep stuff. As far as trying to understand, I guess Your Mind at Siege. So it's really just about figuring out our place in the world, figuring out our mind's place in the world as far as what kind of world we want to build. When we're at the Saving the World Together kind of podcast and website, it's all about envisioning that future world, whatever it might be. For some people, it's very spiritual. For other people, it's scientific and technological. Uses AI automating all the hard jobs so that humans can focus on the fun jobs and find whatever purpose we want in our lives. But the real goal is that we can try to move away from the polarization, the negativity of I'm right, you're wrong mentalities, and where and everyone who's not your way, it's the highway, or it's not. If they're not following your particular mantra, then they're wrong and you're right.
Correct.
So these are the kinds of, I think, challenges that we're trying to kind of somehow get over by bringing all these different people together and ideas together in a way that we can be open-minded and just learn to love and learn to grow together.
Yeah.
So how does that tie in with your book, do you think, as far as Your Mind at Siege? Is the siege, how do we kind of, I guess, ease the siege in the world and try to unpolarize?
What is the siege? How does the siege work?
Great questions. Very great questions. And in fact, the title itself is what you started with, what's talking about. In fact, we could talk for hours on that. But you raised you threw in a very important word that people actually don't pay much attention to, and that's the future. And then you talked about, this polarization, etc. And actually, a very discerning reader or readers get back to me after reading the book several times. And this is their reaction. David, the book has got very little to do with the Diamond Sutra. I said, you're right. Because on every page, I really want to nail down this question to any reader. How do you know what you really claim to know? That's it.
Right.
And let me step back a little. What's happening is, if you realize I live in a country of 1.4 billion people, and if you take the entire Asia, there's probably about a few billion people as well. And that's 35 to 40% of the population who worship a text or texts. So their authenticity, which was really becoming quite vivid in clubhouse discussions, etc., were completely lacking. I mean, for example, the Diamond Sutra says if you repeat just 4 lines of a particular verse, you will be saved. Okay?
Yeah.
So I'm actually pointing out, how do you know what you claim to know? this is the most central question which I think the world needs to ask themselves and understand. So coming down to this polarity, okay? You see, Luke, Martin, and I, each of us have what I would call our own perceptions. And that perception is by history and by culture, by intention and likes and dislikes and how we choose, etc. And because we live in a world where your perception and my perception, we believe it is my truth, we have a clash of perception. And what I'm trying to get people to try and move out from, the first stage, is to get them to move away from their personal perceptions into perspective. Because when you move out from the story that you're telling yourself, or others are telling yourself, which is worse, that you have in the subcontinent, you can actually see the perception of what Martin, Luke, etc., and get perspective. I mean, you see the old picture, which is floating around, and I think it's a good example, of the cylinder, and you have two lights from other side. And one side, it looks like a triangle, and the other side, it looks like a circle and things like that.
Right.
When you look out, it has a completely different perspective. And the reason why the book basically asks the rather important question, how do you really know what you claim to know, is to get you out of the story or the bullshit that you've been telling yourself all your life.
Okay.
And that's where we can actually use that as a segue to really discuss things on what consciousness is not, and how we've been actually, surrendered our authority to something external, whether they're a guru or a gatekeeper or politicians, etc. And this is extremely important, because if we're dealing with 45% of the world who basically surrenders that authority, we are living a life by mimicry and imitation.
Wow.
And that is something I want to reverse.
Yeah.
So much
how
like
do I
how
guess,
the AI works.
You're coming close.
I guess how do we surrender our authority, or surrender our minds, I guess, to the greater good or the greater spirituality of the world, without and still hold on to, I guess, ourselves, and still hold on to who we are, because we all, like you said, we all have our core beliefs that kind of make us who we are. We all have our core, whatever it might be, goals in life. We all have our core desires, and they may be at odds or kind of, at war with other people's core desires. And I guess the question is, if we give up all of that, are we still ourselves, and are we still kind of holding on to who we are? If that core goal in our life is to spread our religion or just spread our goal to everybody else because we're so enlightened and we have all the truth, we have to share it with everyone else. That's our war. That's our purpose in life. So how do we kind of, I guess, move beyond that purpose, or adopt maybe a new purpose that doesn't conflict with all the other purposes out there?
Yeah.
Does that make
You
sense?
see, no, it does make sense. In fact, I'm going to, rephrase everything by just calling what you just said as the default state of the world.
Yes.
I consider that a social disease.
Okay.
I mean, it's a strong thing, because what's happening, when you talk about my beliefs are based on conjecture, speculation, etc., and conditioning, etc., which may not be necessarily true. So what's happening is my inner theater is Martin's inner theater, Luke's inner theater, and mine are quite different and unique. What's happening in the world today is we are trying to impose our inner theater onto a consensus reality as if that's absolute reality. And what we need to tell people, or show them, is how we actually form our reality, both individual and collective. These are two separate things. And what people are trying to do are conflate one with the other. So, for example, I might have a preacher that says, God is a burning bush. Now, that might be my inner theater, but if I impose it onto the rest and actually hammer it down, which is mass hypnosis over centuries, I'm basically telling them is my reality is your reality. If we lose that ability to critically think and question, then we are going to say, is my belief is real, which is what I was calling earlier, is my perception.
Okay.
Not my perspective.
That's good. Yeah, I like that a lot. What do you think, Martin? Are you following this? This is some deep stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. It's just maybe I'm interested because what you're doing, David, is like laying a lot of like questions more so than actually providing answers, like substantive answers. Because like for us, it is like one of the things that is a thing that we're trying to pursue with Look is to actually try to find something that then we can help sort of a group of people maybe agree on doing, that if they do it collectively will actually result in an improvement in the outer world for most people, if not ideally everyone. So maybe that could be related to some of the work that you did, particularly with in the area of ecology. Is that like maybe what if you have any like particular ideas that you believe if people acted on them would result in an improvement?
Certainly. I mean, there is, what I would call the social norm or the collective good, right? I agree with that. It makes the world and life a better place. Since you brought up the things of ecology, what I'm really trying to address is the entropy of industry. You have to break down something to build something. That's the problem. Now, is the way to actually reverse it that if you break down something and build something, then we are actually getting in what is called the economy of negative returns.
Well, you want to make it better than what you broke down, right? So you break down
suppose
something.
We don't need to break. Suppose we don't break it down at all, and actually have a way to actually have a sustainable living, to actually build something greater than the sum of our individual parts.
Right.
Nature is giving us everything. I mean, it's like a mother with a cornucopia of a breast, which is actually giving us all the materials that we don't have to do. We don't have to really rely on. The most toxic substances on this planet is, steel, cement, and deforestation and stuff like that. So chloro-earth, or my ecological self, is that, you don't have to build buildings with cement. I mean, we need to really introduce geopolymers, for example. And for some strange cosmic reason, India has the largest blanket of basalt, which could, replace, steel bars for buildings. So if you actually combine so many things, we can actually build eco-cities far faster and better than what is currently constructed. So, I live in a place where it's rampant concrete construction. There's no planning, etc. Just build something out there in the wall, somewhere where they want to do it, and just sell it en masse to people who need accommodation.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up in my city, Bangalore, I had a population of maybe 3 to 4 million. Now it's touching within about 20 years, about 18 to 19 million.
Wow.
If you look at the neighboring side, and there's no planning. So how do we actually understand that? My angst, if you will, stem from the fact I'm living in an unlivable state. And I had to find solutions for that. And that's what I gave the people through chloro-earth. So that's one aspect of looking at it.
I noticed the one part, I think I read in your blog somewhere, about trying to get all the corporations to bring in the true costs of the pollution into their balance sheets so that we can actually factor in, the good and the bad of the environment along with their profit and their benefits to society. That's something that we've definitely focused a lot on with one of our 7 pillars, is the pollution pillar, to get in some kind of standard worldwide as to what industries are better for the environment, what industries are more sustainable, and then trying to cost that into the balance sheet somehow so that we can let the free market kind of run the way it's meant to be run without all the externalities of pollution. So how would you feel about something like a worldwide carbon tax or a worldwide pollution tax of some kind, to try to, bring those kinds of externalities back into the balance sheet?
I think we need to change our reporting standards first. And we need to have all countries accept those reporting standards. So unless we have that consensus first, we're going to have countries like China, which will say, no, I don't agree. I'm not going to because I need to burn up my coal. Basically, I need to compete with the US for my energy requirements. So unless we have an agreement on what reporting standards are, where the energy footprint is reflected on the balance sheet, we can't have investors either penalizing or rewarding that balance sheet.
So how can we move towards that consensus? Is it possible, I guess is my question for you. Do you think it's possible in the next decade or two, or is it something we should be actively working towards?
We should be actively working to it. And I really believe that initiative must be driven by the powers that actually look at climate change as a threat to humanity, as opposed to working with countries who believe that climate change needs to be put in the background for their own economic development. Because globalization is here to stay, we can have one section of the population or the OECD countries insisting that this regulation should be par for course.
Absolutely.
So if we can actually have this trade-off, then we can actually have people understanding is that, we are really fucking up the planet, excuse my French, for our grandchildren. I mean, let's put it very, very bluntly, because, I've had, conversations with ministers in various countries. When I was in Singapore and Hong Kong, they said, the West screwed up the planet earlier, about 20, 30 years ago. And so cynically, they turn around to me and said, now it's our turn. Who are they to tell us? I mean, this is a refrain that I'm shocked to hear, because I was certain that, the debate on climate change 20, 30 years ago was not that intense. We were only speculating on climate change at that time. So I don't think you can blame the West for, screwing up the climate. They understood it. That's why they're actually rectifying their mistakes. But because climate change is global, you can't have half the world saying, we're going to save the planet and you guys can screw it up.
Exactly.
We need to actually address this question really head on. And we're saying is that we've screwed up. You guys don't make the same mistakes as we do. I mean, that has to be really nailed down.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
This general sentiment in the world these days that some countries not being upset that other countries did a bad thing, but upset that they don't get to do the bad thing as well.
Right. I'm talking about my own country, which basically says, we've got a public listed firm, which is basically bringing up the coal because they want to have energy security. I mean, for 1.4 billion people, how much coal are you going to burn up and how is it going to affect the planet? That's a lot.
Yeah. We've got to kind of help each other leapfrog kind of the coal age into whether cold fusion or solar or wind or whatever it might be.
Speaking of, what do you think of nuclear power in general?
You're bringing up a very interesting thing, is that it's a green tech, but it's actually what I would call radiologically toxic. Okay. Can I use what Martin just said to actually, bring up a very important topic which people are not talking about? And that is what I call patient capital to fund solutions which are already here. That's not happening. So we can have talking shops of climate change, but nobody's talking about the settled science, I repeat, settled science of solutions which can actually mitigate this climate change. Now, if this was more commercial, you'd find the toxicity of industries coming down because you have patient capital funding some of the solutions. And if it's available, for example, 5-6 years ago, we were not really talking about electric cars. But somebody made a lot of money and says, no, I'm going to fund electric cars.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about electric cars being, standard, as opposed to the internal combustion engine, because they were funded. When it comes to nuclear fuel, right, we think, frankly, there are 2 or 3 initiatives happening, which I really don't want to reveal, is we are looking at an alternative nuclear source, 25 to 35%, which is available in India, thorium, for example. So its half-life is much less toxic, if you will, than uranium or plutonium, etc. But also we are also having some remarkable success in fusion energy. Now, if we have energy which is surplus, we'll be addressing quite a lot of the problems when we're talking about fuel, extremely costly fuel, whether it's from, just name it. But when this happens, there's going to be a shift in the way we produce our goods. And the way we're going to produce our goods is going to be robotics, which requires tremendous amount of energy, which people don't actually talk about.
Yeah.
And also material science. We are tapping into new materials, which is actually on the threshold of completely changing our electronic industry. If graphene becomes more popular, you'll see a completely different way of how we produce batteries.
It's exciting, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
We like to think of it robots and replicators, right? Where you basically can get to the Star Trek level of replicating whatever you need from whatever clean energy, sustainable
like
energy. You can
really
get.
good 3D printing type stuff.
Really good 3D printing. And
That's right.
at the nanoscale level, right? Eventually we'll be able to kind of master that process. We're already in the processes of doing that. And then it becomes kind of a post-scarcity world that we're kind of trying to transition towards, where everybody has all the food they need, all the living requirements they need to kind of sustain each other. And then it just becomes, what's our purpose going forward? How do we kind of get through that transitionary period?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the funnest parts of the transition for me, is just trying to understand what that period looks like, and how can I help? How can everybody who watches this video help us make that transition?
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Martin, look, there is settled science. We're not dealing with something new. It's already there.
Yeah.
People like us have the solutions, but no one's hearing us and no one's funding us. So if somebody says, David, I want to build a city in the desert, it's possible. But people are looking at eco-cities and sustainability in the wrong way. We are still threatened by scarcity of water, and no one's talking about sustainable water resources and power before we build an eco-city.
Right.
So if we actually have capital which funds people like us, even to go out and actually understand what the material science is to build some of this stuff, in 5 years, you'll be able to move the cities on the coastline, which are threatened by climate change, into a different area. I don't know whether you know about the Mars project, which is in Arizona or in New Mexico. They actually said, okay, we're not taking materials from Earth to send to Mars to build a township or a moon there.
Yes.
You guys need to find out what the material and build an entire township here. Now, of course, now it's all been made back into mud, but they did it. They did it with their hands and pencil and paper. If it's been done.
Right.
And despite our animosity with Russia, the Soviet Union 70 years ago used to build cities like the Romans out of geopolymers. You could pass by entire towns made by geopolymers. No cement is used. They look ugly, so no one actually pays attention to it. But the technology is fantastic.
Huh.
I mean, you don't have to use cement. I mean, it's been done 70 years ago.
Wow.
So we've got the technology today to actually change most of our housing.
Actually, maybe one question that you said that it's been done decades ago. Maybe some people argue, especially increasingly lately, that maybe some of these things have been done maybe thousands of years ago by the ancient civilizations.
Yeah, I know. I get into that argument, but I can prove easier that it's done decades ago.
Yes, for sure.
So what in your mind is the biggest barrier then, David? Is it just the people aren't paying attention enough, or they're not, the people with the money aren't putting it where it needs to be? And how do we kind of, as a global citizens movement of some kind, how do we spread the word that these are the things we need to invest in? These are the things we need to bring back if they've been doing it for 70 years. How do we focus more on that?
All of the above, but I think we need to have more of these conversations.
Okay.
And the reason why I think we need to have more of these conversations is that we need to have more impolite conversations. I mean, we need to take the gloves off.
Okay.
Because I used to be a banker, so I've sat on the other side of the table, so I know what the metrics of why we should not fund a project. But I'm on this side of the table, and I want to be equally blunt and basically say is that, if you do your time value of money, etc., from our great-grandchildren's kids, what does it make sense?
Right.
So we need to take away this attitude of Wall Street of 90 days reporting to 6 months to 1 year, etc.
Right.
And we really need to re-look at what I term as patient capital.
Well, David,
patient capital, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're attempting to do with something like we've got this new idea for a new World Bank called the Global Public Interest Bank, and its purpose would be to do exactly what you're saying, to try to evaluate things on a worldwide level. What's the best long-term solution? what's the best long-term sustainable solution for mankind or for society and for the whole world, and then kind of create money, if you will, to invest in those things as much as necessary or as much as reasonable for each of these initiatives, and actually fund them based on these new criteria that you're mentioning.
This is a great co-creation which is happening right now. Now, let me share something which I did not intend to share earlier.
Okay.
India lives in the Stone Age to the 22nd century. We have got all these societies, right? If you get out from what you would call the Silicon Valley of India, or etc., or the skyscrapers that you see in Mumbai, formerly known as Bombay, and you talk to the villagers who are starving or committing suicide, who live, frankly, at subsistence level. Sorry, my lips. They don't understand what GDP is, right? What are they looking for? They said, I've got to produce, and I want to take it to the village market and sell it so that I can exchange something and, survive. What they're really describing is, I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in an energy exchange,
Right.
which you guys out in the cities can try and figure out is how we can have an equitable barter system. I know people will attack me for this, but actually it's happening right now. If you go into one of these village markets, etc., they're not talking about money. They don't understand. How does a dollar note represent a dollar? They don't understand that. You and I might. In fact, most people don't. they change money by faith, right? Yeah. So is it possible to create what is called an energy escrow with the newfangled thing that we're talking about, crypto exchanges and crypto money, etc., which would balance off? They don't understand the whole banking system of selling a commodity, going into a bank, and then I have to sign to get my money out, and then I have to do all these exchanges, etc., etc. This is really an artificial system. Whereas there are two trends which are happening, which they like. One is even a guy. If you come to India, you have a guy who's got what is called a QR code, and you can scan it and send money to him, even if he's a beggar. So they understand that you can have digital money flowing like this.
Right.
So if money is digital, it can be in any form. Some people are calling it cryptocurrency, and I'm saying this metaphorically.
Yeah.
But if we actually have what is called a currency, which is in some form of escrow, which balances what Luke raised and called the energy footprint for the kind of sustainability, then you're suddenly shooting up the value of that cryptocurrency. I'm using the word cryptocurrency metaphorically. You can use any word that you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
You understand?
Absolutely. Yeah, and then we've got a very similar idea that we'd like to.
So this idea of what commoditization is, or what the idea of how to monetize world commodities in the form of an energy exchange, something that I have been working on since 2007. Yeah, so we can actually create something. For example, I have a friend in San Francisco. He's much older than me. And he said, I'm trying to work with mines, gold mines, to create what is called a stable cryptocurrency.
Right.
So what he was thinking of is, if I can get the value of what's lying under the ground, then I can peg it to the gold index and do some stuff there.
Yeah,
it's been going on. I said, why do you want to do that? I said, you're looking at jewelry people. Take Louis Vuitton, for example. You've got the gold up in the ground, and it's all lying there, in showcases, etc. You could put a value to that, and you could actually monetize that by an index on the value, etc. In other words, you've suddenly created a warrant on jewelry, a true stable cryptocurrency, which people can actually hold and feel. That was not where I stopped at. I said, can we do that for every commodity?
Yeah. Our big idea was land, focusing on even just land, or even the natural resources of the world, as kind of, even water to some extent is like a natural resource, particularly the commons, the shared commodities among everyone in the world, that all 8 billion people have a certain right to a certain amount of water and air and land, to kind of subsist themselves.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can kind of commodify all of that and create some kind of worldwide exchange based on that,
right,
then you could make a stable coin that way.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
So, we can finesse this.
Yeah.
There are very few people who think like us. So when I say is that we need to have more of these conversations. We're actually creating value in we are monetizing our conversation as well if we get it out. I'm prepared to challenge anybody on the world stage, whether it is on the ecological stuff or the stuff where they basically control large populations to think like the way they want to think. And this is something we are, humanity is facing a great threat from our own demagogues that are all over the world. And I think it's we are at a cusp of either going backwards or forward.
It's utopia or oblivion is the phrase I like, and I would love to be on the part of the winning side. Hopefully,
well, all, not if some of us can help it, so we'll do our bit. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's exciting, David. It sounds like we have a lot in common. I think we're on the same wavelength here, and we're definitely talking the same language. I love it. Martin, do you have any other questions for David? All the things we've talked about today.
I'm still kind of interested in David's opinion or ideas on artificial intelligence.
Okay,
let's go there a little bit.
How they relate to consciousness, to get back from the material to the spiritual a little bit.
David, before we start, do you believe that we will ever have AGI, artificial general intelligence, at any time in the next few decades? Personally, there's a lot of different opinions.
Are you referring to artificial general consciousness?
Yes, basically an AI that can function as well as or better than a human at any general task, and essentially kind of take on a manager role in a McDonald's or take on a manager role.
The difference is between consciousness and intelligence there.
Yes.
That, like, if it actually has consciousness or if it's just faking the performance.
Yeah.
This is a very important topic, and you might have to give me a little more than 5 minutes to discuss this.
Yeah, it's just your opinion to start with. We can always get into the deeper, but I'm kind of just curious on whether you think it's possible, whether it'll happen in our lifetime, just as a general topic. You don't have to prove it or defend it. I'm just curious.
You see, artificial intelligence makes decisions better than us. Let's face it. So when we talk about general activities or tasks or functions, AI will do it much better than any human. That's where people see the threat. Okay? Now, the reason why this is happening and why we see the threat is actually we have reduced our consciousness or humanity merely to functions. And that's not it. It can't be. In fact, our fathers and grandfathers, etc., went to work. I remember seeing that Charlie Chaplin movie where he got caught in the cog and all that stuff, etc., etc. And we think that our lives are the 9 to 5, the desk to job, or the function of doing something, a task-oriented society. And because we've reduced ourselves to that and we accept it, then don't be too surprised that AI will just replace you like this. We have reduced. Now, I live in a sea of technology and IT in Bangalore. Our parents and their parents, etc., have said, you should get more into this and basically master all languages and code, etc., which is another form of language. But don't be too surprised when AI will just basically do all control delete of your own code because it's better than you. So functionally, AI is already here. It can do all the tasks that is currently happening from a functional perspective. But to answer Martin's question, and this is the controversy which everybody likes to get cross swords with me, we or AI will never become conscious. So chill. Why that happens is because we are really much more than functionality. And I'll tell you what is the flaw in AI. You see, we have trained AI, and what AI has done is hacked humanity's operating system. And that is language.
Okay.
This is not new. Because in my book, I start with the problem of language, the limits, the efficiency, and the extent of what language can do, but also its limits.
Okay.
And I think I'm the only person, correct me if I'm wrong, which speaks about this confluence of religion, spirituality, and AI, and language right in the center, which has distorted our understanding of what our authenticity is. So all our ancient texts, which people love to rave about, points to the fact that there's consciousness out there like an absolute or static thing which is served to us through the medium of language.
So just to clarify, you don't think that there will ever be an android as smart as a human that will somehow get a soul, either programmed or given by God, into the android body? Do you think that's possible at any point in the future? Would it ever be possible?
No. I'll explain. Okay.
I get that. And I'm still on the fence myself, to be honest. I love trying to figure out exactly where our future is going to go. Sometimes I have these weird concepts that maybe God is just a super intelligent AI, and that's how he's everywhere all at once. And maybe he created us somehow like that, and the universe is just full of all these intelligences, whether they're biological or not. Maybe it doesn't matter, but it's fun to get different opinions on that, and where the spirituality of the soul comes from, and what's that line between artificial intelligence and biological intelligence on a spiritual level. So
I'm one of the people who actually advocates only consciousness can breed or beget consciousness.
Okay.
A material or something like artificial intelligence and so can't develop consciousness. It's not possible. The reason why it is, and it's a very important topic and we can discuss it some other time, is how humans grow or emerge from phenomena and interacting with phenomena, or what we call phenomenology. And what is an epistemic understanding of the world around us. That's why I distinguish between functionality of the artificial intelligence and what you and I are doing right now. Seeking meaning through our interaction with the world.
Absolutely.
AI can't do that.
No, that's great. And I guess the only way that AI could ever get consciousness is if it somehow merges with a human and becomes a cyborg of some kind, perhaps.
That's still our consciousness.
It's still our consciousness. I mean, theoretically, we could make a baby, from the ground up with human cells and kind of merge technology into it, perhaps in some way, and turn it into some kind of baby.
Yeah. And because I'm a person who's actually had a tremendous, what is called several non-local experiences in the body, I'm quite certain is that many of our human intelligence or interaction does not come only from our cellular structure. It comes what I would call, and this is something which, if you really want to get into something really into the weeds, is what I would call archetypical memory.
Okay.
And where does this archetypal memory come from, and why we behave in a certain way, which is quite irrational at certain times. It's got nothing to do with our biology. It's a very, very important topic, and I think only 5 or 6 people are talking about this.
Archetypical memory?
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I think it's a very Jungian concept.
Yes, it is. It is a very, very Jungian.
It's awesome.
So we will develop what I would call a centaur man, half machine, like the Greeks had. We will. AI is here to stay. But the problem with AI is it's always mining what it knows. Okay? The data that we feed it. But if you keep doing that, what we've clearly proven is something called a model collapse. It keeps going on and on and on, like this, looping itself, and it doesn't develop anything new after some time. It doesn't develop insights. The only way an AI algorithm can grow or a machine grow is when 3 of us get together and pops in some more additional insight or information so that it can mind it faster than all 3 of us.
Yeah, it has to somehow be able to experiment like humans experiment and somehow have these eureka moments of insight by experimenting with the real world in some way. But I hear what you're saying. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So, and can only do that if it is seeking meaning.
Right. I think this was actually talked about, like the one Nobel level scientist that talks about something like this is Sir Roger Penrose. And I think his whole idea is that the problem with our computer technology, including all forms of existing artificial intelligence, is that it's based on the theory of information, but we have no theory of understanding. And clearly,
Correct.
the information processing is only one thing that happens in our brains, but there's a lot more different stuff that the computers don't compute.
Martin, you hit it. I was just going to enter that because we seem to think is that consciousness is all information processing or quantitative. It's not. So there's something called qualia, or something very, very subjective, for which no machine can actually achieve. I mean, when I was in ICU, I had a very, I wouldn't call it an interesting experience, but when I came to, it's in my book. I mean, I was looking at the world just like a webcam. I could see, but I couldn't understand. I'd lost my language. I'd lost the conceptual ideas of putting words together to create an insight. A table, there was no difference between my water glass and the table. I don't know, these were objects, but I couldn't put these things together. So I was looking without any understanding. So what's happening is with AI, it is not looking for understanding or meaning or even having intention. People confuse intention with decision-making, what AI does. I am looking for meaning in life from the same phenomena, which both of you might have an intention quite different from mine, from the same phenomena. Our lives are different. So we are actually trying to find meaning, or what we are trying to do is getting understanding from our interaction with phenomena. What AI is doing, which basically is no different from the language of ancient text, is they're stuck in the meaning of words, not in the meaning of understanding. And it is not a subtle difference. But everything out there is telling us we should be fighting over the meanings of words. That's why I basically say is in one of my chapters, if you bought the book, words mean nothing. Words turn back. And I think if AI has hacked the human or operating system of language, we need to develop a new form of communication in language.
How would we do? Where would we begin to form a new language? That's interesting.
Yeah, because the human mind is basically very incestuous and very inbreeding of what it knows. We are stuck in an echo chamber, or what I would call a hall of mirrors. And we really are very, excited by seeing our own image. And that comes from the fact is that we love to be very comfortable with what we know. It comes from our intellect, not from our intuition. Our intellect, our conjecture says, I'm a mathematician, so I'm going to look at the words from mathematical angle. I'm a physicist, I'm a chemist, or I'm a doctor, etc. So we actually look at the world through certain tinted glasses, what I would call a very inbreeding type of model. Is it possible that we can look at the world without looking at the past or what we know? That awareness itself kills language. Because then we are no longer thinking. We are being aware of being aware, and we can actually see reality as it is, as opposed to composing a reality for what we think it should be, or what is our comfort zone. I think the default nature of mankind is really choosing all this conjecture or getting stuck in our own language, or what I would call the echo chamber of our own language, which is our own thought, which is constructed from that language. Now, I speak multiple languages. I presume some of you guys speak one or two. But if you note, concepts change when you speak from different languages. And when those concepts change, you'll find the thinking changes as well. What might happen if we actually drop those concepts of what is known, and how do we move to the unknown? We have to take away our rose-tinted glasses of understanding how language limits us. That is one of the first 2-3 chapters of my book.
Wow.
Yes,
You piqued my interest for sure.
Yeah, this concept actually has been explored a little bit in some works of science fiction, I believe. I think one of those is Arrival, is the newest one. It's a fairly popular
I
movie.
frankly don't see money movies, so I don't know.
Yeah. Which
But
is,
if any director wants to talk to me, I'll give them a few ideas.
yeah. Because like what you're talking about is like I believe there's actually some convergence in thinking about these things amongst certain people. And so the idea there in The Arrival is that like aliens come and they have their own way of doing language. But like if the people master it and understand it, then it allows them to like understand like what's going to happen in the future types. Or like that you gain like a new faculty through engaging with a new kind of language. I've seen that a couple of times, like not very often, but a couple of times in science fiction.
Yeah. So if we actually drop the limitations of our own faculty and actually look beyond our conditioning, we actually see reality much better than what we compose it for our own convenience.
So basically get a better operating system.
Yep. I am basically putting out there, and it's subtly suggested in my book, is our language has fucked us.
Well, going back to some of the Golden Door ideas, there's actually a book called Through the Golden Door that Tahira wrote as well, that talks a little bit about some of these spiritual concepts of moving humanity through this golden door towards a new age, towards a new higher level spirituality. And I think that definitely has some similarities here as well, with just understanding who we are and where we're going and how to get there together.
You see, most of the books are basically aspirational. I'm basically telling you what the problem is.
That's exciting. Well, you've definitely piqued my interest in reading your book. I haven't read it up till now. I'd heard about it. I read parts of it, but I'm definitely interested in going and reading the whole thing now.
I'm also interested in archetypal phenomenology. Sign me up. It's actually very much in up my alley, because I actually I also wrote a book about astrology. Everything you never wanted to know about astrology. And for me, astrology is exactly the kind of phenomenological, archetypal, Jungian kind of thing, which I know is very popular in India in particular. So I guess maybe there's some connection with the ideas there. So maybe it's just like personally a question for me. Like, so since you are talking about Jungian archetypal phenomenology and you are from India, so what is your opinion on astrology? As like because I'm just interested. My book, just to be clear, is like sort of a journalistic / scientific investigation of what skeptics versus astrologers, what their debates are about. So I'm trying to definitely look at it critically, but I'm just always interested in like some people who know some of the philosophical underpinnings of that kind of stuff, what they think about it.
Okay. So I have a very special class for high-level shamans and adepts to discuss how astrology really could be. Now, there are statistical validation of astrology, but to be quite honest, people refer to the statistics and then give you some output. And that I'm not concerned with. You have the 12 constellations, etc., etc. I'm not concerned. But there is something else happening, and people are ignoring the fact that, I might be born in March or December, and they are focused on the month rather than something very, very interesting on the position of the sun and the moon in March and December. So I'm going to give you share something very important, which very few people are aware of. And it took me about 30 to 40 years to actually observe this, and it was given to me by a very great master. The sun and the moon affects your embodied consciousness at a particular time of the day, on the month, and the year. So because of the sun and the moon born either in March or in December, you have a different embodied consciousness from the person born either in March or December. That's not to stop. The current positioning of the sun and the moon in relation to the cartography that you're now in, whether it's in Europe or in Canada, etc., is affecting your embodied consciousness. This is a very precise science. And that affects your sympathetic and your parasympathetic endocrine system and your autonomous system. You can plot it to the second. And if you observe it, the observation is through the breath from your left to your right nostril every 120 seconds, every 120 minutes, and how it actually swaps. That's also astrology, because we really don't talk about the movement of the sun and the moon and how it affects the body, and how this affects thought. And from the thought, how it behaves action. So I am not really concerned about the planets because it's not easy to prove. But I can prove
it's all connected, I guess, is the question. Everything in the universe is kind of part of this massive
like a cosmic ecology type stuff, if we actually really understand.
So part of the cosmic clock. And what I share with people is how to actually measure the cosmic clock's effects on the body during your waking time. So I'm not involved. I hear thousands and millions of people who are very aspirational to being good. We want to have a better world. We want to do this better. We need to love each other. I basically want to get down to the brass tacks and how we do it.
Absolutely.
Now, that's the difference.
Yeah.
So that's how I interact with people, individuals who come to me and says, okay, I'm stuck, or this or that, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't do get into what Martin mentions is Jungian archetypes, but I call it something else. Some people, magicians, would call it elementals, for example.
It was like also Platonic world of ideas. Like there's in all kinds of cultures, there are ideas of this kind.
Right. And one of the most evil man on the planet, people used to call, but he actually, masked everything what he taught in metaphors, Aleister Crowley. So when we're talking about all of this, we are really asking people, for what my work is, to help people change their minds. Because if we look at it from the individual, the community, and the global perspective, and what Luke had really mentioned, is how do we actually make the change? It's no longer just simply talking about aspiration or feeling good, these topics. We need to get into brass tacks and actually do it. And how? That's what I like to offer. The topics that you mentioned are really, we're still talking about a 30,000 foot level, but we can go really deep and slice it and dice it to actually say how we actually make what I would call the financial escrow to actually balance this out.
Yeah. So I could talk about it all day for sure. And I'd love to meet with you again, David, at some point, once I've had time to digest this a little bit. But this is really exciting stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all this great knowledge with us today. I'm 100% in agreement. You've sold me completely. I was sold even before this, but I'm more sold now on your style of doing things. And I very much look forward to pursuing that.
Sure. Well, if you read the book, and you'll probably, I'll leave this with just one conclusion, which triggers people off. And if you read it and you have questions, I'd love to explore that with you and, your audience as well. I tell people is the road to hell, or in my book, the road to perdition, is our love for certainty. Okay? Take it as you will, and what it actually means.
So we shouldn't love certainty. We have to be open-minded to the uncertain and all the mysteries of the universe if we're gonna.
No, we actually love to reduce things to something finite.
Yeah,
and that's what that's what we call progress. And actually, the flip side is, because we want to reduce it, we have no way of exploring the unknown.
Yeah.
And that's what's blocking us. And that's why AI is dominating us, because they said, hey, Mr. Human, you love certainty. I can do it better than you.
Yeah, nobody can do better. Nobody can do reductiveness better than artificial intelligence.
That's it. And the other thing is, the last chapter is that, will our next guru or God be a silicon deity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, David. Mark, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off today?
No, I'm just very, very surprised by the just sheer convergence of ideas.
It was great. Things happen. The universe makes things happen. When these great ideas come together, three of us should make it, exponential. We should be greater than our individual parts. And that's what, we are here to do. So happy to help in any way. And if you really want to link into any topic after you read the book, you know how to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us today. Please leave a comment. Read David's book, Your Mind at Siege. And we'll continue to push forward together and hopefully build bigger, stronger, better communities that can actually enact and do some of these things. Instead of just talking about it and thinking about it, we can get down to brass tacks and actually do it. So let's save the world together, everybody. Thanks so much for
Great,
joining.
guys. Thank you very much. Great opportunity. Thank you. Cheers.
Bye for now.